Chapter 6 of Management and Integrated Approach, Corporate Level Strategy Part 2, Vertical Integration. Firms that are successful with their corporate strategies know when it is right to diversify and what form of diversification to pursue, related or unrelated. In many ways, related and unrelated diversification are examples of a horizontal expansion plan. Another key lever in many corporate strategies revolves around vertical expansion. A vertical expansion strategy is often pursued in an effort to more effectively share resources and manage costs up and down the firm's value chain. One avenue that some firms pursue to manage costs is vertical integration. In general, vertical integration occurs when one corporation owns business units that make inputs for other business units in the same corporation. There are essentially two different types of vertical integration: backward integration and forward integration. See Figure 6.7. Backward integration occurs when a firm owns or controls the inputs it uses. Forward integration occurs when a firm owns or controls the customers or distribution channels for its main products. Let's take a closer look at examples of each type. An example of backward integration is the Hershey Company's strategy in the early 20th century. The familiar candy company backward integrated into sugar production following World War I to guarantee its own supply of sugar. However, the company bought so much sugar capacity in Cuba that it essentially became a sugar exporter to other companies. Hershey's lack of knowledge of the sugar market and a collapse in the price of the commodity almost led to the company's demise in the 1920s. More recently, many large oil companies have also pursued a backward integration strategy by purchasing oil site exploration services. An example of forward integration can be seen in the example of Walt Disney's acquisition of the ABC television network. Through this move, Disney acquired one of its former customers to control a distribution channel for its content. Other examples of successful forward integration include car manufacturers, who own dealer networks, and Apple Computer's entry into the retailing sector. Through the introduction of its own retail stores, Apple Computer has been able to better manage its relationship with customers. With this strategy, the company does not need to rely on less savvy retail clerks at large electronic stores. It can rely on its own knowledgeable employees. Costs associated with vertical integration. To understand why a firm should vertically integrate, we must understand the total cost of conducting a set of activities. When a firm looks to forward or backward integrate into something, it must not only consider how its ownership of those activities will affect the production costs, but also the costs of overseeing those activities. Similarly, if a firm chooses not to enter those activities and contract for them from a partner, it has to consider not only the production costs incurred by its partner, but also additional costs it must incur to oversee that relationship. In this context, we must consider the difference between transaction and administrative costs. Administrative costs refer to the costs a firm incurs to coordinate activities between its business units. Transaction costs are costs to obtain products or services from a contractor or supplier, as well as the costs associated with writing and administering the contracts for these products and services. 45 Over the years, the prevailing wisdom regarding the benefits of vertical integration has changed. During the 1960s and 1970s, many managers believed that vertical integration provided a source of competitive advantage by offering a firm a steady and more cost-effective supply of inputs for its main business. In this period, companies expanded their vertical scope due to a growing belief that the administrative costs of performing functions in-house were lower than the transaction costs of procuring those from an outside entity. However, more recently, managers have placed less emphasis on controlling a firm's entire value chain through vertical integration. 46. They have increasingly found that suppliers can produce those inputs cheaper and better than they can themselves and leverage much greater economies of scale. At the same time, firms have become better at managing the associated transaction costs that result from external procurement. In some situations, the benefits of vertical integration are greater than the costs. See Figure 6.8. For example, the transaction costs may be so great between stages in a firm's supply chain that the only reasonable action is vertical integration. In general, the more specific or technical the linkage between steps in a value chain, the greater the transaction costs, and the more reason to vertically integrate. As we will see in an upcoming example, the clothes maker Zara has chosen to vertically integrate along certain portions of its value chain because of the complexity and time-sensitive nature of a select group of its activities. While vertical integration may allow firms to avoid some types of transaction costs, it often creates additional administrative costs that must be weighed against the benefits. One administrative cost that vertically integrated firms encounter is a reduced ability to develop core competencies in activities along the value chain. Because a firm's activities are spread across the entire value chain, it is often more difficult for management to develop specific core competencies in key areas. In many cases, it is difficult for a vertically integrated firm to develop a true source of differentiation in its activities because it is spread across so many different parts of the value chain. Finally, incentives are often misaligned in vertically integrated firms. At vertically integrated firms, managers may not exert maximum effort to produce inputs for the larger production process because their internal profitability is guaranteed by selling their products to a sister company. In these situations, internal units do not face the same market pressures that firms outside the control of the corporation do. As you can see, firms encounter numerous costs when they decide to vertically integrate. These costs can outweigh the benefits received from vertical integration. In these cases, a firm should seek alternative approaches to vertical integration. Alternatives to vertical integration: for just about every input that a firm uses to generate its outputs, a manager is confronted with the make versus buy decision. That is, should the firm make that specific product or service, or should the firm buy it from an outside provider? The extreme form of a buying arrangement is one where the buyer puts out a bid and simply gives the contract to the lowest bidder. Such short-term contracts, sometimes referred to as spot contracts, involve a firm's commitment to buy a commodity product at a specific price. When a food processing company needs a bushel of wheat, a manager can purchase it through a spot contract arranged on a commodity exchange. At the other extreme is vertical integration, or make, where the firm chooses to produce that input in-house. Firms must consider the relative costs of each choice. In addition to comparing the relative costs for the production of the product or service across the make or buy spectrum, the manager must also consider the administrative and transaction costs associated with that input. Finally, managers must consider the time and attention that is expended on the process. Could these costs, effort, and time be better spent on other areas that have the potential to create more value for the firm? A number of novel hybrid choices to the stark alternatives of vertical integration, or make, and buying it from an outside vendor are now available to firms. The most common alternative to vertical integration is to engage in a long-term contract with a supplier for certain products or services. A manager can pursue long-term contracts to stipulate certain services or inputs to be provided to the company. An even stronger form of commitment with an external partner may be an alliance or joint venture, where both firms create a new entity that both of them own. Such intermediate arrangements are ones that are neither make nor buy and provide firms the benefits of both forms. In outsourcing, a firm contracts with an entity outside the corporation to perform certain tasks or functions that the corporation used to do on its own. For example, many companies outsource their customer service operations to outside vendors rather than vertically integrating this function. Firms that specialize in call centers may be able to provide better quality service to the firm at a lower price. When a company outsources this function, it often signs a long-term contract that stipulates activities performed over a certain period of time. Companies such as San Antonio-based Rackspace have concentrated on outsourcing as their primary business function. Founded in 1998, Rackspace supplies web hosting services to small and medium-sized businesses that do not have the internal capabilities to perform these functions. With dedicated technology teams, Rackspace often operates as the firm's de facto technology department. Many argue that outsourcing non-core activities brings Rackspace's customers cost savings while simultaneously allowing them to focus on more core functions. The long-term contracting in some ways mitigates the likely transaction costs associated with their working with an external partner like Rackspace. A manager must consider the balance of transaction costs at the firm when making an outsourcing decision. As with all vertical relationships at a firm, certain transaction costs are incurred when the firm decides to outsource an activity. If these costs are lower than the administrative costs the firm would incur by keeping this function in-house, the firm should seriously consider outsourcing it. However, a manager must weigh this cost-benefit analysis against what constitutes a core function at the firm. While information technology may not seem like a core function today, the firm's industry may be moving toward competition based on information systems. A manager must realize that outsourcing too many activities may damage the firm's core competencies. Finally, Finding the right balance between vertical integration and strategic outsourcing is tricky, but it can result in a stronger and more defensible competitive position. Too much focus on vertical integration can result in isolating a firm from the external market. Conversely, a heavy outsourcing approach can lessen a firm's internal capabilities. Zara, a vertically integrated apparel maker. The apparel industry is one of the most visible industries from a retail and marketing standpoint. As a consumer, you can find apparel choices in many different venues, from department stores to upscale shops to Target. Some of the most successful firms in the industry are those that have mastered the art of the apparel value chain through an effective corpo rate level strategy. While many of the major apparel makers choose to focus their activities on specific parts of the value chain, the Spanish apparel maker Inditex has chosen to vertically integrate along many parts of the value chain to differentiate its products and drive performance. Inditex operates 6 chains: Zara, Massimo Dutti, Pull & Bear, Bershka, Stradivarius, and Oysho. Zara is the largest, operating over 2,000 stores worldwide and generating the majority of the company's sales. Zara produces fashionable apparel for men and women in major markets across the globe. Zara manufactures most of its fashion-sensitive products internally and aims to draw repeat shoppers into its highly visible stores by rolling out new designs twice a week. With a constantly changing store inventory, Zara relies heavily on its store managers to provide updated sales data on a daily basis. With these data, Zara's designers continuously track customer preferences and place orders with internal and external suppliers for nearly 11,000 distinct items that are produced during the year. Several 100,000 products given variations in color, fabric, and sizes compared with 2,004,000 items for key competitors. To achieve this customization, production is conducted in small batches, with production of the most time-sensitive items vertically integrated. From production centers, clothing batches are sent twice a week to stores, eliminating the need for warehouses while simultaneously keeping inventories low. In 2014, the company invested over $200 million in a new logistics hub to expand its ability to quickly deliver hundreds of thousands of garments to retail stores in 87 countries. From this tightly interlocked system of activities, Zara has developed an advantage in a highly competitive global apparel industry. Traditional fashion retailers often outsource large aspects of their fashion lines to reduce production costs. While outsourcing can reduce costs, it often does not provide as much flexibility in the design and delivery process. Traditional retailers tend to produce large quantities of various fashion items that they store in warehouses until the products are needed in the individual retail stores. This process requires a considerable amount of lead time. Alternatively, Zara has focused on delivering highly fashionable products on a timely and continuous basis. Without its vertically integrated structure for certain products, the company would not be able to bring garments to fashion-conscious customers as rapidly as it does. Case in point, Zara. How does Zara's strategy differ from a traditional retailer? What key activities are aligned to support Zara's vertical integration strategy? For Zara, how has vertical integration resulted in a competitive advantage? Can Zara's strategy be easily imitated by its competitors? Summary: Learning objective 1. Corporate level strategy entails developing a plan for the management of multiple businesses and deciding how to expand the boundaries of the firm. It also involves organizational design and ownership choices so that the firm can maximize its resources across multiple businesses. A manager has numerous corporate level tools to choose from, including related diversification, unrelated diversification, and vertical integration. Learning objective 2. Through diversification, a firm engages in several different businesses that may or may not be related in an attempt to create more value than if the businesses existed as standalone entities. Transferring skills and resources between different units can create synergies for a firm, and is one reason that a firm decides to diversify. Firms also diversify to achieve financial objectives, including the generation of new revenues or the reduction of operational costs. Learning objective 3. There are 2 primary approaches to diversification: 1 related diversification and 2 unrelated diversification. With related diversification, a firm owns more than one business that uses a similar set of tangible or intangible resources. The goal of related diversification is to achieve economies of scope that enable a firm to leverage their skills, resources, or other assets across similar businesses. Firms that pursue unrelated diversification strategies maintain a portfolio of companies that are not related in any way. The goal of unrelated diversification is not necessarily focused on leveraging the firm's capabilities across businesses, since it is harder to create these synergies between inherently different units. The goal of unrelated diversification is to create financial economies. In general terms, firms that pursue related diversification are relying on a strategic approach to growth and profitability. Alternatively, firms that pursue unrelated diversification attempt to drive profitability through more financial means. Learning objective 4. Given the complexity associated with diversification strategies, the overall results have been mixed. Firms that have been successful with related or unrelated diversification have spent a considerable amount of time on implementation strategies and processes. Managers are key players in the success or failure of diversification. The extent to which these managers work together to ensure the successful implementation of shared resources or leveraged assets often separates the winners from the losers. Learning objective 5. Vertical integration can be another component of a firm's corporate strategy. Vertical integration occurs when a firm owns business units that make inputs for other business units in the same firm. In deciding whether or not to vertically integrate, a firm must consider if integration will provide a greater competitive advantage than purchasing from outside suppliers. The key to success with vertical integration is finding the right balance between what to do in-house and what to buy from others. This ultimately means that the firm must evaluate the costs of internal coordination, administrative costs against the costs of buying from external suppliers, transaction costs. Key terms: administrative costs, backward integration, corporate advantage, diversification, economies of scope, financial economies, forward integration, market power, outsourcing, related diversification, single product strategy, spot contract, synergy, transaction costs, unrelated diversification, vertical integration. Diversification, a strategy in which a firm engages in several different businesses that may or may not be related in an attempt to create more value than if the businesses existed as standalone entities. Single product strategy, a strategy in which a firm focuses on one specific product, typically in one market. Related diversification, a firm that owns more than one business that uses a similar set of tangible and intangible resources. Unrelated diversification, a firm that manages several businesses with no reasonable connection. Economies of scope exists when the costs of operating 2 or more businesses or producing 2 or more products with the same corporate structure is less than the costs of operating the businesses independently or producing each product separately. Market power achieved when a firm attempts to increase the price at which it sells products to levels above the normal price seen in the market. Financial economies, cost savings that a firm achieves through the distribution of capital among business units. Vertical integration occurs when one corporation owns business units that make inputs for other business units in the same corporation. Backward integration occurs when a firm owns or controls the inputs it uses. Forward integration occurs when a firm owns or controls the customers or distribution channels for its main products. Administrative costs, the costs of coordinating activities between a firm's business units. Transaction costs, costs to obtain products or services from a contractor or supplier, as well as the costs associated with writing and administering the contracts for these products and services. Spot contracts, contracts that allow a buyer to purchase a commodity at a specific price. Outsourcing, contracting with a firm outside the corporation to perform certain tasks or functions that the corporation used to do on its own.